Hi guys, it's Kat, the Northwoods Fairy. I'm back. I just got done reading the first part of the book, The Smokey God. I'm still not tired. Like I told y'all, I work second and third shift, and I'm pretty sure my baby is going to be waking up within the next 2 hours for her first bottle. Then she goes back to sleep. Doesn't wake up till later, but I'm still trying to get tired, so I am going to continue reading The Smokey God. So I'm gonna get a little bit closer here. I hope that wasn't too loud. Check the sound quality on the last video. I thought it was okay. Like I said, please be sure to let me know what you think. So this should be interesting for both of us because I haven't gotten this far. So part 4, in the underworld. We learned that the males do not marry before they are from 75 to 100 years old, and that the age at which women enter wedlock is only a little less, and that both men and women frequently live to be from 600 to 800 years old, and in some instances much older. I don't know if I should read this or not. I think it's from the Bible. Let's just see. Like I said, this book has a lot of little side notes, and some of them I find kind of, they kind of get in the way of the story. But let's just read this one. 18. Josephus says, God prolonged the life of the patriarchs that preceded the deluge, both on account of their virtues and to give them the opportunity of perfecting the sciences of geometry and astronomy, which they had discovered, which they could not have done if they had not lived 600 years, because it is only after the lapse of 600 years that the great year is accomplished. Flammarion, Astronomical Myths, Paris, 26. So, I guess the book is Flammarion, Astronomical Myths, or it could be in the Bible. So, sorry about that. During the following year, we visited many villages, towns, prominent among them being the cities of Nige, Delphi, Hectia, and my father was called upon no less than a half-dozen times to go over the maps which had been made from the rough sketches he had originally given of the divisions of land and water on the outside surface of the earth. I remember hearing my father remark that the giant race of people in the land of the Smokey God had almost as accurate an idea of the geography of the outside surface of the earth as had the average college professor in Stockholm. In our travels, we came to a forest of gigantic trees near the city of Delphi. Had the Bible said there were trees towering? Turn the page here. Over 300 feet in height and more than 30 feet in diameter, growing in the Garden of Eden, the Ingersolls, the Tom Paines, and Voltaires would doubtless have pronounced the statement a myth. Yet this is the description of the Californian Sequoia gigantea. But these California giants pale into insignificance when compared with the forests of the Goliaths found in the within continent, where abound mighty trees from 800 to 100,000 feet in height, and from 100 to 120 feet in diameter, countless in numbers, and forming forests extending hundreds of miles back from the sea. The people are exceedingly musical and learn to a remarkable degree in their arts and sciences, especially geometry and astronomy. Their cities are equipped with vast palaces of music, where not infrequently as many as 25,000 lusty voices of this giant race swell forth in mighty choruses of the most sublime symphonies. The children are not supposed to attend institutions of learning before they are 20 years old. Then their school life begins and continues for 30 years, 10 of which are uniformly devoted by both sexes to the study of music. Their principal vocations are architecture, agriculture, horticulture, the raising of vast herds of cattle, and the building of conveyances peculiar to that country. For travel on land and water, by some device which I cannot explain, they hold communion with one another between the most distant parts of their country, on air currents. All buildings are erected with special regard to strength, durability, beauty, and symmetry, and with a style of architecture vastly more attractive to the eye than any I have ever observed elsewhere. About 3/4 of the inner surface of the earth is land, and about 1/4 water. There are numerous rivers of tremendous size, some flowing in a northerly direction and others southerly. Some of these rivers are 30 miles in width, and it is out of these vast waterways at the extreme northern and southern parts of the inside surface of the earth, in regions where low temperatures are experienced, the freshwater icebergs are formed. They are then pushed out to the sea like huge tongues of ice by the abnormal freshets of turbulent waters that, twice every year, sweep everything before them. We saw innumerable specimens of bird life no larger than those encountered in the forests of Europe or America. It is well known that during the last few years, whole species of birds have quit the earth, a writer in a recent article on this subject says. It is not possible that these disappearing bird species quit their habitation without and find an asylum in the within world. Whether inland among the mountains or along the seashore, we found bird life prolific. When they spread their great wings, some of the birds appeared to measure 30 feet from tip to tip. They are of great variety and many colors. We were permitted to climb up the edge of a rock and examine a nest of eggs. There were 5 in the nest, each of which was at least 2 feet in length and 15 inches in diameter. After we had been in the city of Hectia about a week, Professor Galdia took us to an inlet where we saw thousands of tortoises along the sandy shore. I hesitate to state the size of these great creatures. They are from 25 to 30 feet in length, from 15 to 20 feet in width, and fully 7 feet in height. When one of them projected its head, it had the appearance of some hideous sea monster. The strange conditions within are favorable not only for vast meadows of luxuriant grasses, forests of giant trees, and all manner of vegetable life, but wonderful animal life as well. One day we saw a great herd of elephants. There must have been 500 of these thunder-throated monsters with their restless waving trunks. They were tearing huge boughs from the trees and trampling smaller growth into dust like so much hazelbrush. They would average over 100 feet in length and from 75 to 85 in height. It seemed, as I gazed upon this wonderful herd of giant elephants, that I was again living in the public library at Stockholm, where I had spent much time studying the wonders of the Miocene age. I was filled with mute astonishment, and my father was speechless with awe. He held my arm with a protecting grip, as if fearful harm would overtake us. We were 2 atoms in this great forest, and fortunately unobserved by this vast herd of elephants, as they drifted on and away, following a leader as does a herd of sheep. They browsed from growing herbage which they encountered as they traveled, and now and again shook the firmament with their deep bellowing. There is a hazy mist that goes up from the land each evening, and it invariably rains once every 24 hours. This great moisture and the invigorating electrical light and warmth account perhaps for the luxuriant vegetation, while the highly charged electrical air and the evenness of climatic conditions may have much to do with the giant growth and longevity of all animal life. In places the level valleys stretched away far for many miles in every direction. The Smokey God, in its clear white light, looked calmly down. There was an intoxication in the electrically surcharged air that fanned the cheek as softly as a vanishing whisper. Nature chanted a lullaby in the faint murmur of the winds, whose breath was sweet with fragrance of bud and blossom. After having spent considerably more than a year in visiting several of the many cities of the within world, and a great deal of intervening country, and more than 2 years had passed from the time we had been picked up by the great excursion ship on the river, we decided to cast our fortunes once more upon the sea, and endeavor to regain the outside surface of the world. We made known our wishes, and they were reluctantly but promptly followed. Our host gave my father, at his request, various maps showing the entire inside surface of the earth, its cities, oceans, seas, rivers, gulfs, and bays. They also generously offered to give us all the bags of gold nuggets, some of them as large as a goose's egg, that we were willing to attempt to take with us in our little fishing boat. In due time we returned to Jehu, at which place we spent 1 month in fixing up and overhauling our little fishing sloop. After all was in readiness, the same ship, Nas, that originally discovered us, took us on board and sailed to the mouth of the river of Hiddekel. After our giant brothers had launched our little craft for us, they were most cordially regretful at parting, and evinced much solicitude for our safety. My father swore by the gods Odin and Thor that he would surely return again within a year or 2 and pay them another visit, and thus we bade them adieu. We made ready and hoisted our sail, but there was little breeze. We were becalmed within an hour after our giant friends had left us and started on their return trip. The winds were constantly blowing south, that is, they were blowing from the northern opening of the earth toward that which we knew to be south, but which, according to our compass pointing finger, was directly north. For 3 days we tried to sail and to beat against the wind, but to no avail. Whereupon my father said, "My son, to return by the same route as we came in is possible at this time of year. I wonder why did we not think of this before? We have been here almost 2.5 years, therefore this is the season when the sun is beginning to shine in at the southern opening of the earth. The long cold night is on in the Spitzbergen country. What shall we do?" I inquired. "There is only one thing we can do," my father replied, "and that is to go south." Accordingly, he turned the craft about, gave it full reef, and started by the compass north, but, in fact, directly south. The wind was strong, and we seemed to have struck a current that was running with remarkable swiftness in the same direction. In just 40 days we arrived at Delphi, a city we had visited in company with our guides, Jules Galdia and his wife, near the mouth of Gihon River. Here we stopped for 2 days and were most hospitably entertained by the same people who had welcomed us on our former visit. We laid in some additional provisions and again set sail, following the needle due north. On our outward trip, we came through a narrow channel, which appeared to be a separating body of water between two considerable bodies of land. There was a beautiful beach to our right, and we decided to reconnoiter. Casting anchor, we waded ashore to rest up for a day before continuing the outward hazardous undertaking. We built a fire and threw on some sticks of dry driftwood. While my father was walking along the shore, I prepared a tempting repast from supplies we had provided. There was a mild, luminous light which my father said resulted from the sun shining in the south aperture of the earth. That night we slept soundly and awakened the next morning as refreshed as if we had been in our own beds at Stockholm. After breakfast, we started out on an inland tour of discovery, but had not gone far when we sighted some birds which we recognized at once as belonging to the penguin family. They are flightless birds, but excellent swimmers, and tremendous in size, with white breast, short wings, black head, and long-beaked bills. They stand fully 9 feet high. They looked at us with little surprise, and presently waddled rather than walked toward the water and swam away in a northerly direction. The events that occurred during the following 100 or more days begar description. We were on an open and iceless sea. The month we reckoned to be the November or December, and we knew the so-called South Pole was turned toward the sun. Therefore, when passing out and away from the internal electrical light of the Smokey God and its general warmth, we would be met by the light and the warmth of the sun shining in through the south opening of the earth. We were not mistaken. There were times when our little craft, driven by the wind that was continuous and persistent, shot through the waters like an arrow. Indeed, we had encountered a hidden rock or obstacle. Our little vessel would have been crushed into kindling wood. At last we were conscious that the atmosphere was growing decidedly colder, and a few days later icebergs were sighted far to the left. My father argued, and correctly, that the winds which filled our sails came from the warm climate within. The time of the year was certainly most auspicious for us to make our dash for the outside world and attempt to scud our fishing sloop through open channels of the frozen zone which surrounds the polar regions. We were soon amid the ice packs, and how our little craft got through the narrow channels and escaped being crushed I know not. The compass behaved in the same drunken and unreliable fashion, and passing over the southern curve or edge of the Earth's shell, as it had done on our inbound trip at the northern entrance, it gyrated, dipped, and seemed like a thing possessed. One day, as I was lazily looking over the sloop's side into the clear waters, my father shouted, "Breakers ahead!" Looking up, I saw through a lifting mist a white object that towered several 100 feet high, completely shutting off our advance. We lowered sail immediately, and none too soon. In a moment, we found ourselves wedged between two monstrous icebergs. Each was crowding and grinding against its fellow mountain of ice. They were like two gods of war contending for supremacy. We were greatly alarmed indeed. We were between the lines of a battle royale, The sonorous thunder of the grinding ice was like the continued volleys of artillery. Blocks of ice larger than a house were frequently lifted up 100 feet by mighty force of lateral pressure. They would shudder and rock to and fro for a few seconds, then come crashing down with a deafening roar and disappear in the foaming waters. Thus, for more than 2 hours, the contest of the icy giants continued. It seemed as if the end had come. The ice pressure was terrific, and while we were not caught in the dangerous part of the jam, and were safe for the time being, yet the heaving and rending of tons of ice as it fell splashing here and there into the watery depths filled us shaking fear. Finally, to our great joy, the grinding of the ice ceased, and within a few hours the great mass slowly divided, and as if the act of providence had been performed, the right before us lay an open channel. Should we venture with our little craft into this opening? If the pressure came on again, our little slope, as well as ourselves, would be crushed into nothingness. We decided to take the chance and, accordingly, hoisted our sail to a favoring breeze, and soon started out like a racehorse, running the gauntlet of this unknown narrow channel of open water. Part 5. Among the Ice Packs. For the next 45 days, our time was employed in dodging icebergs and hunting channels. Indeed, had we not been favored with a strong south wind and a small boat, I doubt if this story could have ever been given to the world. At last, there came a morning when my father said, "My son, I think we are to see home. We are almost through the ice. See, the open water lies before us." However, there were a few icebergs that had floated far northward into the open water still ahead of us on either side, stretching away for many miles. Directly in front of us, and by the compass, which had now righted itself due north, was an open sea. "What a wonderful story we have to tell the people of Stockholm," continued my father, while a look of pardonable elation lighted up his honest face. "And think of the gold nuggets stowed away in the hold." I spoke kind words of praise to my father, not alone for his fortitude and endurance, but also for his courageous daring as a discoverer, and for having made the voyage that now promised a successful end. I was grateful, too, that he had gathered the wealth of a gold we were carrying home, while congratulating ourselves on the goodly supply of provisions and water we still had on hand, and on the dangers we had escaped. We were startled by hearing a most terrific explosion, caused by the tearing apart of a huge mountain of ice. It was a deafening roar like the firing of 1,000 cannon. We were sailing at the time with a great speed, and happened to be near a monstrous iceberg which, to all appearances, was as immovable as a rock-bound island. It seemed, however, that the iceberg had split and was breaking apart, whereupon the balance of the monster along which we were sailing was destroyed, and it began dipping from us. My father quickly anticipated the danger before I realized its awful possibilities. The iceberg extended down into the water many hundreds of feet. As it tipped over, the portion coming up out of the water caught our fishing craft like a lever of a fulcrum, and threw it into the air as if it had been a football. Our boat fell back on the iceberg that, by this time, had changed the side next to us for the top. My father was still in the boat, having become entangled in the rigging, while I was thrown some 20 feet away. I quickly scrambled to my feet and shouted to my father, who answered, "All is well." Just then a realization dawned upon me, horror upon horror. The blood froze in my veins, The iceberg was still in motion, and its great weight and force in toppling over would cause it to submerge temporarily. I fully realized what a sucking maelstrom it would produce amid the worlds of water on every side. It would rush into the depression in all their fury, like white-fanged wolves eager for human prey. In this supreme moment of mental anguish, I remember glancing at our boat, which was lying on its side, and wondering if it could possibly right itself, and if my father would escape. Was this the end of our struggles and adventures? Was this death? All these questions flashed through my mind in the fraction of a second, and a moment later I was engaged in a life and death struggle. The ponderous monolith of ice sank below the surface, and the frigid waters gurgled around me in frenzied anger. I was in a saucer, with the waters pouring in on every side. A moment more and I lost consciousness. When I partially recovered my senses and roused from the swoon of a half-drowned man, I found myself wet, stiff, and almost frozen, lying on the iceberg. But there was no sign of my father or of our little fishing sloop. The monster berg had recovered itself, and with its new balance lifted its head perhaps 50 feet above the waves. The top of this island of ice was a plateau, perhaps half an acre in extent. I loved my father well, and was grief-stricken at the awfulness of his death. I railed at fate that I too had not been permitted to sleep with him in the depths of the ocean. Finally I climbed to my feet and looked about me, the purple-domed sky above, the shoreless green ocean beneath, and only an occasional iceberg discernible. My heart sank in hopelessness despair. Cautiously picked my way across the berg toward the other side, hoping that our fishing craft had righted itself. Dared I think it possible that my father still lived? It was but a ray of hope that flamed up in my heart. But the anticipation warmed my blood in my veins, and it started rushing like some rare stimulant through every fiber of my body. I crept close to the precipitous side of the iceberg, and peered far down, still hoping. Then I made a circle of the berg, scanning every foot of the way, and thus I kept going around and around. One part of my brain was certainly becoming maniacal, while the other part, I believe, and do this to this day, was perfectly rational. I was conscious of having made the circuit a dozen times, and while one part of my intelligence knew, in all reason, there was not a vestige of hope, yet some strange fascinating aberration bewitched and compelled me to beguile myself with expectation. The other part of my brain seemed to tell me that while there was no possibility of my father being alive yet, if I quit making the circuitous pilgrimage, if I paused for a single moment, it would be acknowledgement of defeat. And should I do this? I felt that I should go mad. Thus hour after hour I walked around and around, afraid to stop and rest, yet physically powerless to continue much longer. Oh, horror of horrors, to be cast away in this wide expanse of waters, without food or drink, and only a treacherous iceberg for an abiding place. My heart sank within me, and all semblance of hope was fading into a black despair. Then the hand of deliverer was extended, and the death-like stillness of solitude rapidly becoming unbearable was suddenly broken by the firing of a signal gun. I looked up in startled amazement when I saw, less than a half a mile away, a whaling vessel bearing down toward me with her sail full set. Evidently my continued activity on the iceberg had attracted their attention. On drawing near, they put out a boat, and descending cautiously to the water's edge, I was rescued, and a little later left on board the whaling ship. I found it a Scotch whaler, the Arlington. she had cleared from Dundee in September and started immediately for the Antarctic in search of whales. The Captain Angus McPherson seemed kindly disposed, but in matters of discipline, as I soon learned, possessed of an iron will. When I attempted to tell him that I had come from the inside of the earth, the captain and mate looked at each other, shook their heads, and insisted on my being put in a bunk under strict surveillance of the ship's physician. I was very weak for want of food, and had not slept for many hours. However, after a few days' rest, I got up one morning and dressed myself without asking permission of the physician or anyone else, and told them that I was as sane as anyone. The captain sent for me again, questioned me concerning where I had come from and how I came to be alone on an iceberg in the far-off Antarctic Ocean. I replied that I had just come from the inside of the earth, and proceeded to tell him how my father and myself had gone in by way of Spitzbergen and come out by the way of the South Pole country, whereupon I was put in irons. I afterward heard the captain tell the mate that I was as crazy as a March hare, and that I must remain in confinement until I was rational enough to give a truthful account of myself. Finally, after much pleading and many promises, I was released from irons. I then and there decided to invent some story that would satisfy the captain, and never again refer to my trip to the land of the Smokey God, at least until I was safe among friends. Within a fortnight, I was permitted to go about and take my place as one of the seamen. A little later, the captain asked me for an explanation. I told him that my experience had been so horrible, I was fearful of my memory, and begged him to permit me to leave the question unanswered until some time in the future. "I think you are recovering considerably," he said, "but you are not the same yet by a good deal." "Permit me to do such work as you may assign," I replied, "and if it does not compensate you sufficiently, I will pay you immediately after I reach Stockholm, to the last penny." Thus the matter rested. On finally reaching Stockholm, as I have already related, I found that my good mother had gone to her reward more than a year before. I have also told how later the treachery of a relative landed me in a madhouse, where I remained for 28 years, seemingly unending years, and still later, after my release, how I returned to the life of a fisherman, following it sedulously for 27 years, then how I came to America, and finally to Los Angeles, California. But all this can be of little interest to the reader indeed. It seems to me the climax of my wonderful travels and strange adventures was reached when the Scotch sailing vessel took me from an iceberg on the Antarctic Ocean. Okay, so we are basically almost done with this book. Part 6, Conclusion. In concluding this history of my adventures, I wish to state that I firmly believe science is yet in its infancy concerning the cosmology of the earth. There is so much that is unaccounted for by the world's accepted knowledge of today, and will ever remain so until the land of the Smokey God is known and recognized by our geographers. It is the land from whence came the great logs of cedar that have been found by explorers in open waters far over the north edge of the earth's crust. Okay guys, I lost my place. I had to get up. My baby started crying for her bottle. So, part 6, Conclusion. In concluding this history of my adventures, I wish to state that I firmly believe science is yet in its infancy concerning the cosmology of the earth. There is so much that is unaccounted for by the world's accepted knowledge of today, and will ever remain so until the land of the Smokey God is known and recognized by our geographers. It is the land from whence came the great logs of cedar that have been found by explorers in open waters far over the north edge of the earth's crust, and also the bodies of mammoths whose bones are found in the vast beds on the Siberian coast. Northern explorers have done much. Sir Franklin D. Haven Grinnell, Okay, so these guys and others have all been striving to storm the frozen citadel of mystery. I firmly believe that Andre and his two brave companions, Steinberg and Franeco, who sailed away in the balloon Orion from the northwest coast of Spitzenberg on that Sunday afternoon of July 11th, 1897, are now in the within world and doubtless are being entertained, as my father and myself were entertained by the kind-hearted giant race inhabiting the inner Atlantic continent. Having in my humble way devoted years to these problems, I am well acquainted with the acceptance of and definitions of gravity as well as the cause of the magnetic needle's attraction, and I am prepared to say that it is my firm belief that the magnetic needle is influenced solely by electric currents which completely envelop the earth like a garment, and that these electric currents in an endless circuit pass out of the southern end of the earth's cylindrical opening, diffusing and spreading themselves all over the outside surface, and rushing madly on in their course toward the North Pole. And while these currents seemingly dash off into space at the Earth's curve or edge, yet they drop again to the inside surface and continue their way southward along the inside of the Earth's crust toward the opening of the so-called South Pole. As to gravity, no one knows what it is because it has not been determined whether it is atmospheric, but I mean pressure that causes the apple to fall, or whether 150 miles below the surface of the earth, supposedly one-half way through the earth's crust, there exists some powerful lodestone attraction that draws it. Therefore, whether the apple, when it leaves the limb of the tree, is drawn or impelled downward to the nearest point of resistance is unknown to the students of physics. Sir James Ross claimed to have discovered the magnetic pole at about 74 degrees latitude. This is wrong. The magnetic pole is exactly one-half the distance through the Earth's crust. Thus, if the Earth's crust is 300 miles in thickness, which is the distance I estimate it to be, then the magnetic pole is undoubtedly 150 miles below the surface of the Earth. It matters not where the test is made, and as at this particular point, 150 miles below the surface, gravity ceases, becomes neutralized, and when we pass beyond that point on toward the inside surface of the earth, a reverse attraction geometrically increases in power until the other 150 miles off distance is traversed, which would bring us out on the inside of the earth. Thus, if a hole were bored down through the earth's crust at London, Paris, New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles, a distance of 300 miles, it would connect the two surfaces, while the inertia and momentum of a weight dropped in from the outside surface would carry it far past the magnetic center, yet, before reaching the inside surface of the earth, it would gradually diminish in speed after passing the halfway point, finally pause, and immediately fall backward toward the outside surface, and continue thus to oscillate like the swinging of a pendulum with power removed, until it would finally rest at the magnetic center, or at that particular point exactly one-half the distance between the outside surface and the inside surface of the Earth. The gyration of the Earth in its daily act of whirling around in its spiral rotation at a rate greater than 1,000 miles every hour, or about 17 miles per second, makes of it a vast electro-generating body, a huge machine, a mighty prototype of the puny man-made dynamo, which at its best is but a feeble imitation of nature's original. Pardon. The valleys of the inner Atlantis continent bordering the upper waters of the farthest north are in season covered with the most magnificent and luxurious flowers, not hundreds and thousands but millions of acres, from which the pollen or blossoms are carried far away in almost every direction of the earth's spiral gyrations and the agitation of the wind resulting therefrom. And it is these blossoms or pollen from the vast floral meadows within that produce the colored snows of the Arctic regions that have so mystified the northern explorers. We passed the crimson cliffs of Sir John Rawson forenoon of August 5th. The patches of red snow from which they derived their name could be seen clearly at the distance of 10 miles from the coast. Okay, this is about that balloon expedition. La Chambre, an account of André's balloon expedition on page 144, says, "On the Isle of Amsterdam the snow is tinted with red for a considerable distance, and the savants are collecting it to examine it microscopically. It presents, in fact, certain peculiarities. It is thought that it contains very small plants. Scoresby, the famous whaler, had already remarked this. Beyond question, this new land within is the home, the cradle of the human race, and viewed from the standpoint of the discoveries made by us, must of necessity have a most important bearing on all physical, paleontological, archaeological, philological, and mythological theories of antiquity. The same idea of going back to the land of mystery, to the very beginning, to the origin of man, is found in Egyptian traditions of the earlier terrestrial regions, of gods, heroes, and men, from the historical fragments of Manetho, I don't know how to say it, fully verified by the historical records taken from the more recent excavations of Pompeii, as well as the traditions of the North American Indians." It is now 1 hour past midnight. The new year of 1908 is here, and this is the third day thereof, and having at last finished the record of my strange travels and adventures I wish given to the world, I am ready, and even longing, for the peaceful rest which I am sure will follow life's trials and vicissitudes. I am old in years, and ripe both with adventures and sorrows, yet rich with few friends. I have cemented to me in my struggles to lead a just and upright life, like a story that is well nigh told. My life is ebbing away. The presentiment is strong within me that I shall not live to see the rising of another sun. Thus do I conclude my message, Olaf Johnson. Like sincerely Olaf Johnson. I said that pretty fast. Okay. So I guess I will read, since it's short. And I just want to see if there's any photos in here. There's another book I have called Agartha, which I believe is similar. I've only been able to read so much of it. I believe it talks about the inner earth, but there might be some pictures in that one. And that'll probably be the next book that I read, because I want to read it in general. And this is like killing two birds with one stone, I guess. So, Part 7, Author's Afterword. I found much difficulty in deciphering and editing the manuscripts of Olaf Johnson. However, I have taken the liberty of reconstructing only a very few expressions, and in doing this have in no way changed the spirit or meaning otherwise. Pardon me. The original text has neither been added to nor taken from. It is possible for me to express my opinion as to the value or reliability of the wonderful statements made by Olaf Jensen. The description here given of the strange lands and people visited by him, location of cities, the names and directions of rivers, and other information herein combined conform in every way to the rough drawings given into my custody by this ancient Norseman, which drawings, together with the manuscript in its intention at some later date to give to the Smithsonian Institute to preserve for the benefit of those interested in the mysteries of the farthest north, the frozen circle of silence. It is certain there are many things in Vedic literature and Josephus, the Odyssey, the Iliad, Tyrian de Lecupres. I only know how to speak Spanish, so I think that might be French. I don't know. Early history of Chinese civilization, Flammarion's astronomical myths, the Normans' beginnings of history, Hesiod's Theogony, Sir John de Mondevelle's writings, and Say's records of the past, that to say the least are strangely in harmony with the seemingly incredible text found in the yellow manuscript of the Old Norseman, Olaf Jensen, and now for the first time given to the world. And that is the end, my friends. The Smokey God. So now, I read the whole book for you in 2 series. And I'm going to grab this other book here. I have some other books in mind already. This one is used. I bought it used off of Amazon. It's called Agartha, A Journey to the Stars. But it does actually talk about, I believe, an inner earth. It's very good with lessons. I apologize, I just drank something bubbly and but anyways, so trying to find here. I think there were actually some pictures of I apologize about that. My dog barked. Hopefully I'll be able to edit that out. But Agartha is very interesting because it talks a lot about... Okay, here we go. If you're going to learn about, the Smokey God, you might want to learn about Atlantean, Lemurian, and those cultures. And in here, there is some descriptions of things like that. Okay, so it's got... This is a page I folded. I don't know if you guys will be able to see this at all, but it's like this. And it says here, it talks about the Atlantean civilization, which was located in the approximate area of the Bermuda Islands, the Central American peoples, Aztec and Mayan civilizations, the early Indian cultures located in now what is the United States. it's very interesting because a lot of these things all go together, like the giant skeletons. There's also, if you ever watch Gaia, Greg Braden, he talks about a lot of things, but one thing he talks about is that in time there was a golden age where there's Atlantis and Lemurians, and they lived together peacefully for the most part, I believe. The Atlanteans may have taken things too far. These are all things that I want to get into, and I'm going to look for more of my books to read. This one I will read. It is quite a read, though, but it has a lot of good information in it. I've read parts, the beginning of the book. I haven't gotten far. I've never been able to get far, but this will be one of the next books that I read, Agartha. Agartha is basically like some kind of a guide for someone. She, gets messages from Agartha, I believe. But we'll get more into that, and I will get, more into theories and things about Atlantis, the Lemurians, Native American cultures and their beliefs. I'm reading the Dalai Lama, but my plan for anything positive is to record it outside with my little camera and my phone. So, I love the outdoors and the peacefulness. Pretty soon, spring will be here, and it will be a great time to read books outside. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that book, and I hope you give me feedback on the sound. Hopefully, certain noises didn't bother you. Hopefully, I'll be able to edit it out if I can remember at what point there was a bark or, all those other noises. But anyways, guys, y'all have a good night, okay? And I will be making more content as much as I can.